most interesting thing in impact. Volunteer Canada launches its most ambitious project yet under the leadership of Megan Conway. A new report called A Roadmap to Meet the Moment, co-creating a national volunteer action strategy for Canada. The roadmap identifies gaps, assets, and opportunities in volunteer across the country. Now, with detailed data regionally and demographically. Now, Conway notes that Canada hasn't had a national volunteer strategy since 1967. Yikes. So the last time Canada had a volunteer strategy, we were all using rotary phones and typewriters, and we were in the middle of the Cold War. The country didn't have the Charter of Rights and Freedoms or the Canadian Human Rights Act, or the last time Canada had a national volunteer strategy, working women didn't have the right to maternity leave. The Labor Code was only amended in 1971. This is frustrating. It's a patchwork, but it's a decent patchwork of data and research that's emerging on the state of volunteering in this country. And guess what? From coast to coast to coast, the country is in a deep volunteering and participation crisis. A Statistics Canada survey from just 2022 reported that close to 70% of volunteer organizations reported running short of volunteers. Now, this is against the backdrop of just in Ontario alone, a 75% increase in demand and services. This is a similar story across the country. And this is in everything from sports and recreation to your community hockey to Big Brothers, Big Sisters, all the way to board directors for your local health charity or support for seniors to go for walks in their neighborhoods. This is absolutely crushing. Now, this isn't new news. There was a declining trend before the pandemic, and it was partly due to an aging population. Volunteers mostly were folks who were retired and had the time. But it's also due to the digital revolution. There's also a declining population rate. There's a range of micro factors. But then the pandemic accelerated the decline, followed by the affordability crisis that is still gripping the country. It's become too risky to volunteer. Folks don't have enough time to volunteer. We don't want to commute to volunteer. And many cannot afford to volunteer because now they're working 2 or 3 or 4 jobs to make ends meet. But here's the nuance of this crisis. We actually don't know how bad it is in many cases because there's different kinds of volunteering and caring. There's formal and informal, there's regular and episodic, and caretaking is rarely counted as volunteering. Or if I help out in my temple one day when I visit, or if I shovel my elderly neighbor's driveway, or if I helped out a little bit during Hurricane Fiona in my home province of Nova Scotia. Volunteers are the backbone of communities large and small. I've worked in Ibuavik and Nunavik, population 450, and I've worked in Toronto, population 4.5 million. Both communities are run by volunteers. The Volunteer Canada report is comprehensive and it outlines major drivers, trends, key considerations, and an entire roadmap to creating a national volunteer strategy. Now, I've read the whole report, but there are 3 linchpins to all of this work in my view, and this is foundational to a roadmap and strategy. First, this can't be about addressing the symptoms of lowering volunteering. The decline is a symptom of a deeper cultural and structural problem. We need a bold new vision of caring in this country. What's the new collective idea of care? Will today's idea of care satisfy tomorrow's needs? Funny enough, a global pandemic couldn't even bring that out. So what's the next generation vision for caring in Canada? Second, there's a class issue within volunteering. Volunteers are often seen as free or cheap labor. They have no power, no protection, and no voice. There's a deeper narrative shift that has to shift the culture and perception of volunteers. These are humans who have deep expertise and who deeply care, but they're often the last people that are cared for. Number 3, volunteering has a massive inclusion and racism problem. I've applied for volunteer roles in high school, but I've been turned down because of how I look, because of my so-called complicated name, and I still get turned down. Black, Indigenous, and people of color face systemic racism in the volunteer world. But there's no comprehensive study on the systemic racism of volunteers in Canada. Only when there is an anti-racist approach to volunteering will we all feel like we actually belong. There is enormous potential to Volunteer Canada's roadmap, and it gives me a ton of energy. But we need a bold, renewed, collective narrative and vision of caring and sharing in Canada to bring volunteering into the 21st century. And that's the most interesting thing in Impact. I'll see you soon.